a journalist that has covered movements and things, social issue movements like this in the past, can you tell us where does this fit in with the others you've seen? How does this seem different, if at all, to you? It seems different. I know it does to me, and I know to a lot of people it is feeling a little bit different and a little more consistent, and maybe this is the opportunity to see change.
Well, I started covering reproductive justice organizing in about 2012, and I'm happy to talk about that movement. It's certainly related. But it was around that same time, a little bit later in 2013, the summer of 2013, after George Zimmerman was acquitted. That's the man who killed Trayvon Martin. That BLM really took off, or the organizing that we call BLM organizing now. And that was when I started really paying close attention to the work of groups like the Dream Defenders. So that's an organization in Florida. These were people who had been, campus organizers, but in the wake of the acquittal of Zimmerman, they took over the Florida State House and staged a sit-in. I can't remember for exactly how long it happened now, but it was during that summer that we began to see this kind of new formation, these new groups led by young Black people pop up in places, and doing actions in places like Tallahassee, but also, in places like Oakland, where I was living at the time, in Chicago, really all over the country, that were employing these new techniques these new tactics and strategies that were new. Direct action was a big part of it. Like actually putting their bodies on the line was a big part of it. They really led with this commitment to being what they called unapologetically Black, which was new, right? I think prior to that, you had seen a lot of people organizing in multiracial organizations and coalitions, but these folks really led with their Blackness and talked about the ways in which being Black in this country is a specific thing. They called out anti-Black racism. They didn't talk about necessarily being people of color, but talked about ways in which state violence affected specifically, Black people in particular ways. State violence and vigilante violence, right? Because we know that George Zimmerman was self-appointed neighborhood watchman who took it upon himself to kill Trayvon Martin. So what I've been tracking, in the years that I covered BLM organizing closely, which was like 2013 to about 2017, was the things that they were doing that were new. One of these things, so part of it was the cultural piece, right? Of talking about being unapologetically Black. They talked about being leaderful, right? I think prior to that, we had seen in like civil rights organizing, this kind of commitment to charismatic leadership. People can talk about King, but then when you scratch the surface a bit and ask people about maybe Bayard Rustin or Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, you start to see the question marks, right? Because there was this idea that there was this one male leader, cisgendered, heterosexual male leader on high who led everything. The organizing that I've seen in recent years really rejects that frame, and they talk about being leaderful. They prize collaborative and decentralized leadership. What I also noticed was, as I talked about the direct action, so they were taking significant risks. You saw people, I remember living in Oakland when the protesters there chained themselves to the police department. I can't remember exactly what year that was. Around that same time, you saw direct actions in Homan Square in Chicago, Manhattan, where you had people doing direct actions at police unions, right? They were taking the fight directly to where the people who they saw as holding up progress were. You saw these new, what was called Black Brunch. I don't know if you all remember that, but this new tactic of Black people showing up in brunch spots. I was living in the Bay Area at this time, and it was very new. Young Black people, maybe it was an intergenerational thing. I remember young folk showing up in brunch and singing, chanting, but basically carrying this message of like, you don't get to just sit here and have a pleasant brunch. Black people are dying, and we're going to let you know about it. And we're going to bring the fight to you where you're enjoying yourself on a Sunday morning. Those of you in the Bay Area also remember probably the Black Friday 14, the organizers who chained themselves to BART at the West Oakland BART stop on Black Friday, the biggest shopping day of the year. And they did it carrying this message of, again, no business as usual. You don't get to go shop while charges are not sticking. These police officers who kill Black people are not being prosecuted and are not, we are not seeing justice served in the case of these officers. So this, these new risks that they took together. And then also alongside that, you've seen them taking electoral strategies. This really emerged after Trump was elected. You saw a kind of retreat from direct action and from people being in the streets and from protests. The stakes were higher under Trump, right? Because you saw all of these, you saw the return of body armor and bayonets and these things that during the Obama administration, they had stopped the transfer of these kind of incredible military weapons from military departments to police forces. Trump returned that. He overturned the stop on that had gone in place under Obama. So the stakes were a lot higher, and it was at that point that you saw a lot of these organizers turn to electoral strategies, get involved on the local level in backing. There was a mayoral candidate in St. Louis, a Black woman who organizers there really got behind. You saw them really, in addition to backing certain candidates, you saw them calling out, saying, if Trump didn't win the popular vote, why is he president? Raising questions about the Electoral College, calling out voter suppression measures, calling out laws that disenfranchise people with felony convictions. So in addition to the voter organizing they were doing, they were questioning some of the kind of fundamental assumptions we make about how people engage in the electoral process in this country. And what's been interesting to me in these past couple of weeks is that I'm seeing all of these pieces that I watched develop over those 4 years when I was following this organizing very closely. It's all coming together.
Not coalescing.
All coming together. It's coalescing. The risk taking, the culture, them saying, okay, Jacob, right? So last weekend when they called the mayor of Minneapolis out into the town square, hundreds of people, and it was like, okay, Mr. Mayor, are you going to commit to, and excuse me, I don't remember if they said defund the police or disband the police, what their language was. And the organizer said, yes or no answer. And he said no. And what did they say as soon as he said no? Well, you're up for re-election. So we will remember this, and go home, Jacob, shame. The most kind of humiliating experience I've ever seen an elected official could go through, right? He had to walk through this crowd of people shouting, shame, go home, Jacob. So all of these pieces that I saw tried out in different places around the country are now happening. And I think what's interesting is that this is a multiracial movement, right? So you see Black people in leadership, but you see a lot of people who are not Black joining in and following the leadership of groups like Movement for Black Lives. And that to me is also very new. To this point about this multiracial crowd and what's different. I also think people are mobilized and motivated because we're seeing white people be attacked by police. We're seeing non-Black people be brutalized by police out here.
Mm-hmm.
The 75-year-old man in Buffalo, who the president is now saying possibly was an Antifa protester who somehow staged his own tipping over. I mean, I'm haunted. I was talking with my mom about this. I can't get that image out of my head. That was terrifying. And honestly, to be transparent, I don't really watch, I have not watched the video of George Floyd being killed. I don't watch Black people brutalized anymore. I've seen enough of it. I know it happens. But watching these white bodies, a 75-year-old white man get pushed over backward by police, and then they act like they can't help him as blood pours out of his ear, terrifying. And I think there are a lot of people who may have initially been like, why are they protesting? What are these people talking about? Who then see this footage of, the white woman reporter in Louisville who police were shooting pointing guns at. So I think both watching white, non-Black bodies brutalized and also the attacks on the press, that's been something else that has really shaken me. Waking up last Friday morning or Friday before last, I've completely lost track of time now, watching Omar Jimenez of CNN be arrested by police. That was terrifying. That was terrifying. Molly Hennessy Fisk, who's a reporter with the Los Angeles Times, she was fired on by Minnesota police and hit with rubber bullets. She immediately recorded herself and, posted it to Twitter. White woman, seeing here in Cincinnati where I live, Cincinnati Enquirer, that's our daily paper. reporter got tackled by like 5 officers. And in all these situations, when you watch, you see the person saying, "I'm press," and just this kind of total confusion as the police continue moving toward them. So there are these shifts that are happening. And I think what some folks are saying to themselves is fascism is what happens when police start treating everyone the way they've always treated Black people. And it's scaring people. It's terrifying people. I think what is most interesting to me about this whole defund the police demand is really just that we're talking about it. Just the fact that Alicia Garza is on Meet the Press talking about defunding the police and probably differentiating between what it means to defund the police and abolish, right? Because these are 2 different things. The fact that the Washington Post Ed Board, I think it was today, had a piece about defunding the police. Like the New York Times has had several stories in recent days about defunding the police. It was on PBS NewsHour. Charlene Carruthers, formerly of BYP, Black Youth Project 100, was on, debating some kind of law enforcement official about whether or not we should defund police. Like, this is tremendous. Okay, like I was first introduced to this idea in August 2016, which is when the Movement for Black Lives released their policy platform. It was at that point that, you know, people had been saying over the years, like, what do you guys actually want? What do you want, right? What are your policy demands? And they took time and they released this whole set of policies. And one of them was introducing this whole idea of a divest invest framework, divesting from what they saw as exploitative institutions and reinvesting those funds in resources that, as they put it, would support the education, health, and safety of Black people. In August 2016, it was very pie in the sky. There was no serious discussion about what they were talking about, right? Now, 4 years later, look where we are. And look how, you know, I saw a funny meme on Twitter that was like, 3 weeks ago, we were all teaching each other how to make banana bread, and now we're teaching each other how to defund the police. Like,
Wow.
And it's true.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, it is. And I think what's interesting about this is, someone mentioned this earlier, but the opening created by this global pandemic. We all had to go in our houses and be quiet and sit with ourselves and think about what actually matters. What is life for? What do I value? How do I want to spend my time?
Yeah.
And as soon as there was a little bit of opening to say, I guess you can come out of your houses if you want, or we're just going to bust out of our houses, people are reemerging with a completely different relationship to what it means to live in this country. And we haven't fully like grappled with that yet because we're living through it. But at some point, we're going to get to a moment where we really reflect on the possibility that was created by these stay-at-home orders to set the stage for precisely this moment that we're in, where so much depends on our ability to imagine.
Yeah.
There's so much about, we might not know the specifics. I don't know. I'm not even going to speak to the specifics of defunding the police because I'm learning in public with everyone else. I don't know. But what is different is that our imaginations are open to it. And I think that that's very important. So often a conversation about voting focuses on what's happening at the federal level and really pressing people who might sit out elections to vote for president or vote. And I think there needs to be a different kind of conversation where we talk to people about the importance of voting in local elections and use that as a way to plug them into the electoral process in general. Because it's very easy to see why people would not be inspired by Joe Biden, right? By these people who are at the top of the ticket. It's very easy to see why someone would look at the Democratic Congress people's theatrics yesterday with the Kente clause and be totally baffled and turned off. Right. So we have to my kind of approach is like, that's just happening. And we have to just kind of like deal with that. Right. But that doesn't mean that we get turned off from the entire process. And so my hope is for people who work in that space, I hope there's like more of a conversation of bringing people in by showing them this is why it matters that you vote for school board. This is why it matters that you vote for, these local offices.